So, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Long Road Back, a podcast all about the hidden side of injury recovery and ultimately to help athletes feel less alone during their injury journey. And so I'm absolutely delighted to say I've got a guest I'm very excited to have on the podcast with me today. And today's guest is someone who played rugby throughout the England age group pathways, going through under 16s, under 18s to the under 20s. Actually signed a first professional contract with London Irish, straight out. Represented a variety of clubs across the English Premiership, including Irish and Saracens, Falcons, and a part of a very, very good Wasps team, if I remember rightly. And before a spell at Benetton Treviso, obviously, and then ended up retiring there as part of the URC. He was also a very successful Sevens player alongside his 15s career, representing England Sevens between 2012 and 2015. I think I've read somebody scored over 50 tries at the World Sevens Series, which is, I think, about 50 more than I've ever scored in 15s, which is a bit humbling. And actually won an Olympic silver medal at Rio 2016. So I'm delighted to say Marcus Watson is with me today. So Marcus, thank you so much for being here today.
No, not at all, mate. Thanks for the invite and looking forward to chatting all things injury related and whatever comes up.
Awesome, yeah. So actually, we just mentioned just before we came on air. So I asked you, just about a bit of background about your kind of injury journey. And you mentioned just now that you actually wrote down, a list of your injuries. And it's going to be interesting to hear from you. How did it feel almost, just before you even get on to, your just briefly about your rugby journey? Almost like, how did it feel almost writing down? Or was it like it was crazy just realising just how many you've had?
It was very interesting. I've never done it before. So first time I kind of, the first two ones that stick in mind are the two ones that probably kept me out for the longest or were kind of ongoing throughout my career. And then it surprised me the flow that you kind of get into working from head to toe. And before I even had a time to think, I've got a whole page full of injuries that I had, and I don't think I've finished. I kind of I could have kept going, but I did a page and was like, right, yeah, that's
and
enough. What's kind of and what's a bit wild about me in terms of injuries is I think I think everywhere I'd gone I'd probably was considered as an injury prone player, which isn't exactly the title you kind of want, but I also only had one operation in my whole career, so I managed to kind of escape some of the really big injuries, but just had ongoing ones that kind of kept me out for weeks or months at a time rather than a real long stint.
Talking about those, recurring injuries is so important because I think for so many of us, we kind of hear that, injury means, surgery, these massive layoffs. And I know there's a lot on social media. We always see about the ACL recoveries, the Achilles, and obviously we're having a brief chat about, like traumatic Lisfranc fractures and whatnot. But I think that kind of recurring, I say minor injuries, but it's not really fair to call them that. But, that don't need those surgeries are still just important. I think it's actually something that probably more people actually experience. And it's definitely something we'll come on to. So just before coming on to, analysing those two injuries you mentioned there and, your journey with injuries, I'd love to hear kind of, your rugby journey kind of through your eyes and whether any kind of moments or teams that stood out. I mean, I said to you before on air, I remember watching your Wasps team. It's one of the most remarkable teams I've ever watched. And obviously winning that Olympic silver medal must have been pretty special.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, kind of my journey, I think in some respects has been, I was going to say actually I've kind of followed the path well trodden, but actually thinking about it because of Sevens, I was fortunate enough. I think all the way through the age group stuff, I did follow that path. 16s, 18s, 20s, was in the academy from London Irish from 14, I think, and kind of found my way the whole way through. 2 years in the academy there, and then I kind of hit a bit of a strange crossroad where I was probably I played Sevens in my last year in the academy at London Irish. I was never at that point. I had played for the first team, but I played 3 games in sort of the LV Cup, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the LV Cup.
Yeah, and then I played. I think I had a 30-second cameo against Bath in the Premierships at 18. So I wasn't in the first team. I wasn't also miles away from it, if that makes sense. So I was kind of in a situation where I thought I'd played Sevens in my last year as well, England Sevens, and I thought, okay, I could stay at London Irish. I could also then had the opportunity to go to Sarries and do a dual contract with Sevens, which was kind of a one of its kind sort of thing. I had me and a guy called Ollie Lindsay Haig tried it at Quins,
Oh, yeah.
and very relevant to what we're talking about now. But in terms of the idea was great. But the way that it was structured was horrible because S&C coaches speaking to each other, physios speaking to each other. The way sevens worked at that time, it kind of split off a little bit. It had been seen as a pathway to get into. It's been seen as a pathway before Danny Care, James Haskell, those kind of players went sort of through and played England 15s or went on to play in the Premiership. It split off into kind of its own sector, or it's starting to, and it become full time, but it would only train Monday to Wednesday. So you'd fit a whole week's training Monday to Wednesday. I'd then go to Saturdays, Thursday to Saturday, and I had no day off in between. By the end of that, that's the year I had to have surgery. The only surgery I actually ended up having was after that, just because of complete burnout. Didn't really get looked after, was too young to probably speak up. Then went full-time sevens after that. Really enjoyed my sevens, but only went, to be honest, initially I started playing sevens because I loved watching it and because I wanted to improve my 15s. And it had just gone into full-time. The Olympics had just been announced that sevens was going to be in it. So it was kind of a bit of a crossroads. Shall I stay in it? Shall I not? I was fortunate enough that my coach, Simon Amor, brilliant coach, wanted some sevens boys to go back into 15s and kind of do it like the old way by seeing how that can progress and showing that sevens really can really nurture players and look after players, make them better. So then went to Newcastle for 2 years, came back, did the Olympics, and then was at Wasp for 6 years, 5 years, which was awesome. Learnt loads about myself, about rugby in general there, and then yeah, last 2 years in Benetton, which was quality just to go abroad, experience something different way of rugby, different way of life. It was really cool, and I'm very, very glad I did.
Oh, nice. When you speak about the sevens and 15s link, now obviously for those maybe not as well tuned in rugby, and they're still rugby union, but obviously two slightly different games. From my own personal experience, I mean, I love my sevens, even as a back row forward. I mean, let alone more of a winger kind of thing. I love sevens. I think that I remember with the growth of sevens, even more so. I mean, even now as well. I mean, I think it's still growing with things like the UL7s, obviously you're involved in, especially in the UK. It's a brilliant pathway. It's an absolutely brilliant pathway. You very rarely see a player who goes for 15s to sevens and then back to 15s be a worse player when they come back. I mean, just the stress it puts on your skills, your tackling and breakdown and whatnot. I think it's brilliant. And you mentioned there something really kind of caught my attention was you mentioned about the balance of playing in sevens and 15s and that initial period with that contract. And I think I'm really interested to hear how that felt. And you mentioned about being quite young, kind of not wanting to speak up, which I think is something that a lot of us can kind of resonate with across all sports. And then how that maybe linked to your injury journey, or especially as the beginning of that injury journey.
Yeah, it's a combination of a few things. Well, I say me in this particular situation. I was young, and I was very much a go with the flow kind of youngster. Also, I think it's a funny. If I was to put myself in that situation as a 30-year-old, my knowledge would be much better in terms of how far I can push my body in terms of knowing maybe the right times to really push the recovery or getting all those things right to kind of perform at my best and make sure that I don't get injured or suffer from kind of burnout. And then alongside that, I would speak up and make sure that I had those relationships with the S&C coaches, with the physios, to be able to be like, I did this amount at sevens Monday to Wednesday, which probably means I need to have a little break at some point in the week or something like that to recover. But I didn't do that. I just carried on going. At that point was when I had an injury called osteitis pubis, which is a really, really frustrating one. And I just have memories of me finishing sevens training, sitting on the bed and going to get up and just being in so much pain that I kind of nearly fell back into bed again. And then it kind of eases up as you kind of get going, and I'd be out training later on, wouldn't be able to sprint or really do what I wanted to do, but I kind of got past and managed to go okay enough that I was getting selected and playing. But it worked weirdly, which it shouldn't have, thinking about the injury. I was okay in sevens, and I was horrendous at Sarries when I went there. That was the worst 15s year I probably had in my whole career, because I couldn't really do anything that I wanted to do. And I was in a brand new team. So, in terms of speaking up, already being quiet, there was no way I was going to kind of turn around and be like, oh, look, I'm struggling here with this. Can someone fix me? Which, in hindsight, 100% that's what I should have done. And I ended up doing, but through, training for too long, much longer than I should have.
Yeah, and do you mind if we dive into that? Because I think that, or just briefly, because I think that not wanting to speak up. Now, I know we're talking about rugby here, but this can apply across so many different sports. And I think that, especially when that sport means so much to us, in this case for you, obviously early on in your career, building your name, kind of say building your brand, but like building your brand of rugby and building your name in rugby, I can really understand that feeling of not wanting, I say to rock the apple cart, but it's more than anything because you want to play. Like you want to play the sport, you want to get the best out of yourself. Were there any moments, I mean, it's interesting you say so, in hindsight, you wish you had handled it maybe slightly differently. Do you remember what particularly would you kind of change? Would it have been that, being clearer that, I'm really struggling with this? Can we manage my load a bit more? Almost increasing that dialogue with the coaches in S&C?
Definitely, the dialogue's the main thing, because, being completely upfront, one thing I've massively know about myself is I'm by no means, I've played with some very, very tough people, and I by no means would describe myself as being very tough. But what I am is I can be stubborn, I can be stupid, and there's a bad combination at times, because I will I'll play. I will listen to what somebody has, unless somebody needs to tell me I can't play for me to not play sometimes, a lot of the time. And especially when you're young, you won't get that very much, especially if they don't know you as a person. So speaking up, getting to know the S&C, the physio, so they kind of know what you're about. I had that really good relationship at WAS towards the end of my time with the physios and S&C, that they knew that I was a bit like that. So I almost needed them to say to me, no, you can't play. It's not a good idea to play, or someone to pull me out of it. The worst thing is if you have a coach being like, yeah, if you think you can kind of get through it, then then play. Because I was like, I can get through it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to play well, or play as well as I'd like.
Yeah, I think that it's honestly, sorry, as you're speaking there, I'm thinking back to my own experiences, and it's amazing how many similarities there are between players' careers. And I think what really interesting what you just said there at the end about, it's almost that when the coaches give the agency to the player will naturally want to play, no matter what the sport is. They're going to want to play, and there's no shame in that. I think what I was really interested in hearing you say there was about almost that it's when the decision is taken out of the hands of the player, but by someone you trust. That's when we can that's when we can kind of build towards, okay, we're not going to train this day, we're going to manage your load. And how did that kind of experience of not having that dialogue link to the experiences you have with my pronunciation's not very good, osteitis pubis, if that's close enough.
Pubis,
that's the one. Yeah.
Well, so the key word you said there is trust, because coaches aren't going to, if you're young and you're quite happy-go-lucky, which I was, if you probably didn't, know me as very well, or later on in my career, shall I say, you'd know that I was kind of, I would like to think of myself as being very professional. I was kind of doing the right things to make sure that I was playing, and I probably wasn't doing that as much when I was younger. But I also wouldn't say I was extremely unprofessional at kind of any point, really. But that relationship is key, and at Sarries, when I had the osteitis pubis, because of my age, not because of anything to do with Saracens, because as a club, I was only there for one season, but what a well-run club that is, with the people in the right places. Because in terms of me feeling like a youngster, and I say not being able to speak up, that is nothing to do with the environment they created. If anything, that was encouraged. It was more just myself. Yeah, it was more myself, just being young, and not really understanding as well, because if a physio at that point, everything up to that sort of osteitis pubis injury that I had was very simple. Tear my hamstring, you've got grade 1, grade 2, you've got 4 to 6 weeks. That's your time frame. Off you go. This one was like, we'll see how it goes. See if it progresses. See if it gets better. If it doesn't, you have to see this specialist. If it does, then we'll monitor your load for a certain period. But then I'd go off to the sevens. Everything did not fit that injury very well in the slightest, which ended up with me having to have surgery at the end of that season.
How did that kind of almost like lack of control feel? Because I think one thing in injury is so important is almost knowing, right, okay, even if the goalposts move a little bit, this is happening now, this is happening next. And I think what really kind of stood out to me, what you said there, was about it almost felt like it was just snowballing. And it was not a ticking time bomb, because that's unfair on you, but the idea that it was just, okay, we'll sort it out next time, or we'll see. How did that kind of like lack of almost, not, what the right word is, timeline maybe feel?
No, that that is the right word. Ticking time bomb's absolutely correct in my situation, because I did not like that at all. I found that very frustrating, and I remember just straight away thought it with a couple of injuries. Might not be the right way to think about it, but it was like, just give me some kind of injection, I'll be good to go. Just be able to tell me that there's something that's going to fix it, and then I'll be okay. Even if at that point it was like, we rehab for 2 weeks. If I knew that I could do something for 2 weeks and I'd be better, happy days. But I didn't like we'll see how it goes, because also I was like, well, let's see how it goes, and I need an operation, let's just do the operation now. And that's quite very a bit of a naive way of thinking for a start, but that's the way I was when I was younger, being like, right, get it done, I need to play, I want to play, I've got this to do, that, and that was my mindset, which definitely shifted slightly. That doesn't mean that it wasn't as frustrating, but the lack of control, as you said, wasn't nice. Every time up to that, I'd gone into a physio room and been told, this is the plan, and it was a bit more open-ended, and that was difficult.
When did things kind of shift then towards making that decision? Was it a case of the acuteness of the injury warranted the surgery, or was it more of a case of, enough is enough?
Combination of the two. So it was a case of, there's not a huge amount they can do with the osteitis pubis. It's a massive case of management load, which was pretty difficult by jumping between the two teams anyway. So it was a case of, we're going to keep monitoring it and see how it goes. If it doesn't get better, you have to have a prolonged period of rest. I kept playing on it, and I ended up actually with a labral hip tear, probably by the fact that I was running differently and all sorts that probably affected that. So potentially a blessing in disguise, because I then had an operation on that, and all the rehab for that would help the rehab for the osteitis pubis pelvis issue as well. And I just remember having that operation. I think I was out for 3-4 months. First run back felt unbelievably good, and was like, I was like, right, I'm back almost, which is exactly as we spoke about before. I needed that, and I wanted that kind of feeling to be like, it's over, I can crack on now.
Must have been a sense of relief.
Absolutely. That's the best. The amount of times that's happened, I could definitely felt it then, but the most obvious ones have been, I'm sure we'll talk about it with the tendinopathy side of things. Some of the relief in that was would actually probably be almost my favourite moments in my whole career, which is strange because no one would think that. But there's been times just in warm-ups before games where I've been like, wow, this feels like I'm good to go.
And just moving on to, we'll move on to the hamstring, the tendonitis stuff, in a second. But it's so interesting for me to hear you say that, because I know if I look back at my career, and I've spoken to friends about this as well, is that yes, I remember the games. I remember the individual games. Of course, I remember, I don't know, making a tackle here, catching a line over here, whatever, stuff like that. But more than anything, I remember, my shoulder hurt that game. So, I remember, or I didn't feel right that game, or my knee was bad. And it's like, I think it's so interesting to hear from you, through your career, is that resonates with you as well. And I think that's so interesting for so many people, because I think that something we probably underestimate more than anything, I think, in the way social media is, in terms of pushing harder and harder and doing more, is that sometimes more than anything, I mean, a happy athlete is a good athlete. And I think a happy athlete who feels, comfortable, safe, and more than anything, as injury-free as possible, those are the athletes that perform at their best. And that, sometimes that does come from taking a step back, and sometimes that does come from, taking the rest and whatnot. So I think it's really interesting. And then just coming on to the, the tendonitis here, I love to, you've mentioned to me off air about it, but I'd love to, if you're able to share kind of where that kind of journey started, and then how it maybe prolonged throughout your career.
Yeah, well, and just to mention something that you said as well, it's the kind of when the thing that's the most difficult about those situations is no one ever, with rugby being such a tough sport, not many people play 100% anyway. So that's not a problem. That is highly unlikely. You'll play at sort of an 80-90%, but you'll be able to have the capacity to kind of still play to 100% whilst your body's pretty sore. The difficult things are not being able to play to 100%. You're playing at 60-70% and your mind doesn't allow you to do the things that you know you can. That was by far the most frustrating thing throughout my career. But yeah, as you mentioned with the Achilles, so my first bout of tendinopathy I had when I was very young, at about 20, at the Sevens, and that was dealt with very quickly. I had a great physio, who was a good mate of mine who was there. That was dealt with very quickly. Probably only had it for, I don't know, a month or something, and I was good to go. Then had nothing. That was just a passing injury. Wouldn't have even thought twice about it. I had got some orthotics and did my calf rehab for it, and I was good to go. Then went to Newcastle, absolutely fine. When I got back into the Sevens for the pre-Olympic sort of trial and camp, it crept back in towards the end of it. So I remember before being out in Rio, or in Brazil, just before we went out into the Olympics, having to take, I remember missing out on one of the sessions because my Achilles was really sore, managing it, having to sort of take your anti-inflammatories and the rest of it. And actually remember the whole tournament itself was a perfect situation in some respects, because my Achilles was sore, but I was still able to do everything that I needed to do, and I could perform at 100%. But it started to come into play. That carried on at Newcastle, but I had some shockwave therapy, and then I think I was out for 2 months with it, and then I was fine. Turned up to Wasps. In that pre-season for my first season at Wasps was when I really started getting it badly. And from 24 to 25, I then had it for the rest of my career, up and down, and times when it was really, really bad, where I was probably still out there training when I really shouldn't have been, making it worse, and training and playing very sort of averagely, as far as I was concerned, and kind of having to deal with that. And with the rehab, it kind of went that I was probably too relaxed with it at the start. Then I went massively overboard and got obsessed with it, reading dissertations about Achilles tendonitis at night and stuff like that. And then towards the end of my career, finding a good balance where I kind of knew the right things to do, and I could kind of take a little bit of ownership on it, and relax slightly in the know-how that I was trusted by S&C and by physios and the rest of that. So that's kind of a brief insight into how that went down.
Yeah, I think you reading dissertations is something that, I think ChatGPT is probably taking that spot at the moment, isn't it? Where you can kind of put all your symptoms in, and you get all sorts of, sometimes positive and sometimes, misleading symptoms back. But that kind of, especially when it goes on for so long, it's exhausting, which I'll kind of come on to in a second. But Was there a moment that kind of perspective shifted from, you said initially a bit lax days, maybe then going too much into it? What helped you kind of find that middle ground? Was it a conversation with S&C coaches, or maybe just yourself kind of balancing slowing down, but then also going hard when you needed to?
Yeah, I think it was probably a case of me figuring myself out. I got to a point where it's actually mad when I think about it, how much I was doing on it, because I don't know where I'd read this from, or I almost got so overclouded with this is what I have to do. And I was speaking to so many people that I kind of added them all up together rather than just following one plan. So I was doing 2 rehab sessions on my Achilles every single day with no rest at all. This was 7 days a week, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But it was panic, and it was like, I need to fix this. And I think I must have had a realization at some point when I was like, I don't think there's much more I can be doing to make this better, and it's not getting better. So then kind of taking a step back and actually going like, well, obviously it's not going to be getting better. You're doing 14 rehab sessions a week. Like, that's not going to be helpful for anyone. And then the confidence in trying it, because I won't lie, I would have been worried to not do. It was a case that if I missed the rehab session, I'd be like, my Achilles is going to be terrible tomorrow. I'd panic. It was probably it's a case of almost anxiety about that, actually, and then relaxing about it, realizing that I didn't need to do that, and it started feeling a bit better when I was taking certain breaks and letting it actually recover properly. And then the difficulty on that was kind of knowing that it was unlikely to completely go away. I'd have to keep doing bits and pieces, but I was quite comfortable with that at the time because I got used to doing too much anyway. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I think that, I can deeply resonate with that kind of anxiety stage. I think especially when it's so long, when something's with you for such a long time, let alone the fact that, you're a professional athlete, not only is it your identity and kind of how you see yourself, there's also, in that case, your job as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's, from my own experience, also people I've spoken to as well, that deep fear of what's going on, and that, like, I talk about control and acceptance and whatnot, but when it's happening to you for such a long time, it's really, really hard to gain that kind of sense of control back. And I think, was there anything like, and you mentioned there the mental side, was there anything kind of tangible that when you then began to, take those steps back, was there anything that really helped in that stage, in the sense, was it things like just knowing that, like, I know I'm making the right decision for my, injury, so that when the temptation to go harder came back, you were able to go, no, this is the right thing to do?
Yeah, it was mass, and it was also so much trial and error that by the point that I'd probably got to, if I had a bit of a flare up, I'd kind of be like, okay, now I know that these certain things will help it calm down a little bit. I can speak to any of the physios there about it. In particular, one of them called Ali James at WAS, speak to him. And we ended up going to see specialists and whatnot. But yeah, there was plenty of things that were so frustrating about it, because I don't know how much you or some of the listeners will know about Achilles tendinopathy, but you can put it on a scan and your Achilles can look pretty much the same as anybody else. So you can't really judge how sore someone's Achilles is. Which makes it even more difficult, because you can see an Achilles and be like, yeah, that looks fine. Like, you're okay to play, but it might not feel like that.
Well,
so yeah, exactly. I'd love to know how many scans I actually had on my Achilles overall, with ultrasounds and the rest of it. 80% of them came back looking like, yeah, you've got tendinopathy in it, but it doesn't look like it's it's not hanging on by a thread or anything like that, where you have a hamstring, you pull a hamstring, it's binary yes or no. It's a tear or it's not a tear, it's a pull or it's not a pull. This was more complicated, which also added to the frustration.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the hidden nature of injury, it sounds so crazy to even describe, but genuinely is actually one of the hardest parts of all of it, is that with some things it's very black and white. Now, I broke my leg when I was younger, in a cast, fixed, done, got better, happy days. And Even things when I dislocated my shoulder before. I had surgery done. Yeah, a bit of bumps on the way, but better. And it's only been since we talked, we chatted a bit off air, but I've got a Lisfranc fracture at the moment, but I've actually also got, been suffering this pretty chronic nerve pain on my other foot as a consequence of the offloading of weight for such a long time. But it's that's the bit that's getting me the most, was because you can have a scan on it and they go, we can't really see much. Now, very, very specific scans can pick things up, and I'm grateful I've had them, but broadly speaking, when you have that scan, that you get the message back, oh, well, it looks okay. Mm-hmm. When you've been in pain for so long and it's exhausting, it's really hard to deal with, because you're like, well, hang on a minute, I feel like my pain's being dismissed, but I know they're not doing it deliberately, but the scans are going. And I know I've had times when I've kind of questioned my own self. Well, hang on, am I making a bigger deal of this than it is? And I was kind of interested to hear kind of your experiences with that.
No, exactly the same thing in terms of you almost kind of second guess yourself to be like, am I just soft or what's going on here? And then to add to what you're saying as well, is it's not just the scans that might not necessarily show exactly how you're feeling or how sore the injury is, should I say? But it's also the kind of position that I am and the athlete that I am. For example, I can't remember who it was at Wasp. Someone else had some pretty bad tendinopathy as well, but he was a prop, and no, it was a second row.
Sorry,
Sorry,
I shouldn't laugh. That's not fair to laugh at
no.
I can understand. I kind of get where you go with this in terms of the.
Well, the thing that was good about it was he actually said it to me. It was second row, and he kind of said, "Look, mine's really sore, but I can kind of get past doing what I'm selected for because I'm just here to whack things, and I can still do that. Like, it's still pretty sore, but I'm not relying on my athleticism. Where it's just like, for me, if I'm not fast or my footwork's slowly down, my rugby ability drops by. I'd always say that I was kind of fit. You have some wingers who are almost all athletes and not the best rugby players. I would say I was probably like a 50-50, or if anything 60-40 towards my sort of athleticism. So played a massive part in me as a rugby player. So I'd have to try and get my body to being in a decent place to be able to perform how I wanted to. So that was difficult, as well as some of the things in scans and the rest of it. And then even more difficult, there's other times I'd wake up the next day or in a week's time and I'm like, I actually feel pretty good to go. So it could just be a case of, I remember doing rehab, and everything was going really well, and I did one thing that was slightly different, and my Achilles just flared up for the next 2-3 months or rest of the season. Just one slight thing that I did different, and that's frustrating as well.
No, I mean, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think you mentioned about the environment, and you kind of mentioned there about kind of how that relates to injury. I'd be really interested to hear, was there anything to do with the fact that when you were able to, went from slowing down to then doing lows, to then suddenly finding that balance, how did that impact you kind of within that environment? Because obviously rugby is a very, and quite rightly, incredibly difficult sport. It's tough. You have to have a certain level of toughness, and you quite rightly mentioned earlier, no one plays at 100%, but they can perform at 100%, and there's a very key difference there. Was that maybe was there a contributing factor to like how you manage the environment as to how that helps you then manage the injury?
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, because I played rugby because I enjoyed it. That's the bottom line behind it. But then I also started really enjoying being at clubs and having that feeling that I was very important for the team, and that I could help the team and the rest of it. So when that kind of goes, or at Wasps, it was a very strange one, because I'd have periods where that I massively felt like that, then a period of drop, probably around an injury, and then back up, and then sort of drop. So it was very much like a roller coaster. But in terms of the environment and my how I felt within it, fortunately, I'd got quite a bit older, and that maybe didn't matter to me as much in terms of the being important in the environment did, but I didn't have a sense of sort of not feeling important or anything like that within the team, if that made sense.
Yeah.
I still felt like I was well and truly part of that side, and that just kind of comes probably with a bit of age as well and a bit of experience.
No, it's so valuable you've shared that, because one of the hardest things for so many of us is just the feeling of watching your team from the sideline. Now, and sometimes it's manageable. And someone asked me the other day, actually, like, how do you feel watching, let's say, England? And I'm like, well, okay, I mean, it's not too bad watching England play, because I knew I wasn't good enough or big enough to get there. That wasn't my level. The hardest ones are when you're watching the teams that you feel like you could be a part of.
Of course.
And then can't. But you're quite right in saying, I know the times that when I have felt best at managing it, I've either felt a big part of the team, which is really important, but also I knew I had the permission from the team if I had to step away, because I was going to be out for 7 months, 8 months, and then come back when I was ready to. I had that kind of permission as well. I think that made a massive difference for me in my journey. And just kind of coming to the end here, I'd be really interested, kind of on a final note, we have touched on this throughout the interview, but if there's kind of one piece of advice you could kind of give back to your younger self, whether that's the one going through the initial, I'll shop it up, Ostis pubis. Yeah. I'll get there one day.
No, don't worry.
Whether it was dealing with that, or whether there's a piece of advice you'd have for yourself through that tendon issue. Was there something, like, what was one thing you kind of wish you could tell yourself at that younger age?
Yeah. So I think it's a difficult one, because the main thing I've learned about the injuries is I've probably learned just as much, if not more, about myself from injuries than actually playing rugby. Maybe equally or whatever, but I've learned a lot, and it's also certainly made me more. It's made me more diligent in terms of hard work or routine, knowing the importance of that. And so it'd be easy for me to turn around and say, oh, I should have worked harder, or I should have worked smarter, or whatever. But figuring that out was a whole process in itself that's probably put me in a good mind frame for just life in general, if that makes sense. I'm probably a bit wishy-washy with that, but it's if I turned around to myself and said you need to work harder, I would have actually probably there was a point where I was working on that injury too hard, if you know what I mean. So I kind of figured it out in the end, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would say massively trial and error. The one thing I would say actually in terms of advice is be curious, ask questions, find the right people to speak to. Don't just sit down and wait for something to happen for you, because it won't. You have to go out and find out the right people to speak to, and be curious with it all. Make sure you go out and ask people questions, because that's how you find answers, and that's how you end up getting into a trial and error situation. And then, sorry, to go back to something you said about watching your teams play, it just made me think of something that I always think about. I used to say all the time is I used to probably, one thing that's hard about watching your other team, in complete honesty, is watching somebody play in your position and play really well. That's people don't like talking about that, because they
don't, but it's true, isn't it? Yeah, it's
people want to be team players, which I certainly like to think that I am. What I would say about it is all it means is that I would never be annoyed at somebody for I've had teammates who quite clearly make it out as if they don't like someone in their position. I was never like that.
Position hate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'd then wants to play better than that person. You play well, I'll play better than you. Everyone's in a better position rather than the team. But it certainly makes it's certainly not easy when you get injured and someone plays really well in that position. That can also be something that's not the best that can be that you learn from whilst you're injured too.
Yeah, I mean that's such a, because interesting is that we don't like talking about it, and I think it interests me almost why we don't like talking about it. Because I remember all the jokes are, oh, he's nicked your position and whatever, and obviously sometimes you laugh it off, other times you're like, oh yeah, hang a minute, bit of shoulders back kind of thing. But as you're out, more than anything, it makes you want to play better. And I think the more in my experience, the more I was able to disassociate the person from the position and be like, okay, I'm going for that shirt, and I'm trying to, competing with them, but it's a healthy competition. That kind of helped me, kind of manage that when it was, dealing with that. So, and just one thing, actually, just the end, I remember what really struck me, what you said there, was that the benefits of the injury. And it's something that is underexplored, I think, a lot. And obviously, understandably, they're hard. It's so hard. Injuries are such a hard process. But the resilience it builds, the discipline it builds, I mean, I have a whole new understanding of what resilience means, and a whole new understanding of what, the true meaning of discipline and hard work, because I read somewhere that the hardest exercise is actually the one you don't do. It's that, we all want to go out there and hit the gym and rehab and whatnot, but sometimes it really is taking that, step back is actually the best thing we can do for our injuries. And that curiosity as well. It's almost like, well, why do I have to take a step back? And once we understand the why, everything else becomes so much clearer. Well, look, I'll kind of end it on that. So I really, really appreciate that. I think a lot of people, that feedback, especially at the end, I think just the honesty surrounding positions, and also just that, curiosity is something that hit me, and I'll look at as well. I think we'll definitely sit with a lot of people. Marcus, thank you so much for coming on. Yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Not at all, Tom. Thanks very much, mate. Really enjoyed that.